Question is are you a COV, et cetera, long hauler, meaning you got sick, you haven't recovered from it, and you might be into 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks, 12 weeks even, some people, and they haven't recovered from it. And I'm going to show you why again, a place to look. And this is actually based on research. So just remember, guys, I'll let you know when I give you my opinion. I will also let you know when I'm giving you research. So a lot of the stuff when I talk about the immune system, actually will come from Guyton's medical textbook of physiology. I'm just going through it and reading through it. At our immune system talk coming up, the stuff that they go through, unbelievable, that you would think that doctors had read this before, but how they're acting makes me wonder if they've even read the textbook when they were in school, or even if they even have a copy of it right now. Or maybe they just, I don't know, took the Cliff Notes and just skipped over the book. Who knows? So let's ask this question. Are you a COVID long hauler? So first, what I want to go over with you, this comes from Cleveland Clinic, okay? Cleveland Clinic, they asked the question, what symptoms do coronavirus long haulers typically experience? So let's talk about the symptoms first. All right, so here's what they say. Long-lasting symptoms often include coughing, tightness in the chest, shortness of breath, headaches, muscle aches, diarrhea. Perhaps the most significant symptom that is being seen across this group is actually fatigue. So I want you guys to pay attention to that, is you can have a lot of different types of symptoms, with the one that seems to be just over, above and beyond of anything that people are having that seems to be the most consistent, is people having persistent fatigue, okay? Oftentimes this group feels very run down and tired. They can't exert themselves or exercise, and simple tasks like walking to the mailbox will often leave them feeling, again, exhausted. Chronic fatigue, like we're seeing in this group, can be incredibly debilitating and frustrating. Many long haulers also report brain fog, difficulty concentrating, or feel like they aren't as sharp as they used to be. So again, brain fog, they're feeling coughing, tightness in the chest, shortness of breath, headaches, muscle aches, even gastrointestinal issues. But the most consistent one that they're seeing in these people who are experiencing a long-lasting, quote-unquote, illness afterwards is chronic fatigue. So I want you guys to make sure that you pay attention to that, because I'm going to help you guys make a connection, okay? Now, who actually is getting that, or how do you define what is known as a long hauler, or people who are really not feeling well after they have a COV, et cetera, infection, okay? Well, I went to the British Medical Journal, okay? So just so you know, we're referencing the Cleveland Clinic at the British Medical Journal, and here's what they actually say. They call it, first and foremost, post-acute COV, et cetera, 19 infection. So post-acute COV, et cetera, 19, as extending beyond 3 weeks from the onset of first symptoms, and chronic COV, et cetera, 19, as extending beyond 12 weeks. So really what we're talking about is the people at 3 weeks, and then if it has resolved or not past 12 weeks, or literally, you're talking about 3 months, okay? So 3 months after initial infection. Now, around 10% of patients who have tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 virus remain unwell beyond 3 weeks, and a smaller proportion for months beyond that, okay? So basically, you're seeing 90% of people who test positive, they have pretty much a complete resolution at about 3 weeks, but 10% are not feeling well after 3 weeks, and even a smaller people, even after 12 weeks or 3 months after that, okay? So guys, make sure that you share this, because there are some people, there's no doubt about it, there are people who still are not feeling well literally months after they have had an infection. So do I think that this is real? 100%, because we can explain this from a physiological perspective. So the British Medical Journal has said, yes, it exists. Yes, there's such thing as COVID long haulers. And here is the criteria, anywhere from 3 weeks, 12 weeks, and beyond, of people just not feeling well after initial acute infection, okay? Now, here's what's interesting. Could it be that maybe people still at 3 weeks, still have not cleared out the virus. Yes, it's very, very possible. Guys, I remember the sickest time of my life. I had walking pneumonia, which is basically a viral pneumonia, and I had it for 6 to 7 weeks. This was back when I was about 24 years of age. I slept about 3 to 4 hours a week. I was in class for 30 hours a week. I was also teaching another 6 to 7 hours a week. I was probably studying, another 10 to 15 hours a week. And then on top of that, I was in the actual student clinic another 10 to 15 hours a week. So I was putting in consistently, 5 days a week, about 16 to 18 hour days. It was absolutely awful. And being a student, I really didn't have much money to live on. So I basically sustained myself on McDonald's and ramen noodles. Okay, I'm not proud of that. Not proud of that at all. But literally, that's just what I ate. I basically lived on about $4 to $5 a day of eating. So I basically ate refined food, glue and glue and flour, and with a little bit of MSG mixed in. All right. So it was no wonder that I got sick. Poor sleep, a lot of stress, and very poor nutritional status, and I got really sick, and it took me 6 to 7 weeks for me to be able to get over. So there are maybe some people whose immune system has been so knocked down, and I'll show you how you can measure this. It's been so knocked down that really after 3 weeks, their body still has yet to clear out the virus. However, there's something that I want you guys to consider as well. And so this comes from WebMD, all right? So WebMD, and they asked this question, and this just comes from an initial sample. This was done from a specific Jeffrey Gold, a researcher who asked the question. Guys, this is where science comes in. Science comes in where you make an observation and you ask the question, you test your hypothesis. This is not happening in today's atmosphere, is it? So when people say the science is settled, it's never settled. Because you don't know everything about everything. And in fact, if you say it's settled, you immediately stop any kind of scientific advancement and any kind of scientific inquiry. So Jeffrey Gold, the researcher, he actually asked this question. Well, let's ask the question why some people who have an infection, why they just seem to not get better or persist for a long period of time. And so he said something. He said, this is very interesting. So he took a group of 30 people who are considered long haul COV, et cetera, infection patients who have not yet completely recovered and are suffering from fatigue. And what he found is that 2/3 of those people actually had a reactivation of a specific virus. Now, that virus is called Epstein-Barr virus. So what they had is a reactivation of a virus that was already in their body. Guys, this is why I even disagree with people who say, oh, I've already had a natural infection, so I have immunity to it. Guys, there's no such thing as immunity. There is only sufficiency through repeated exposure. The more that you can expose yourself, the more you are priming the immune system to continue doing its job. So what is Epstein-Barr virus? Well, it's the virus that's associated with mononucleosis. It's a herpes virus. And remember with herpes, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So there are certain viruses that you really never get rid of once you have an initial infection, like varicella with chickenpox, with herpes virus. Epstein-Barr virus is once you have an initial infection, it stays within the body and the immune system handles it. It will handle it. It will keep it under control. This is why if people have had chickenpox, why later on, once they let their immune system get depressed, then they can break out in shingles. Now, why do they get shingles? It's not that the virus all of a sudden became angry. It was actually, it's trying to reactivate itself, but your immune system, particularly your T cells, are always keeping it at bay. So it's the same thing with Epstein-Barr virus. Guys, most of you actually have that virus within your body. They estimate about 95% of people, by the time that they reach adulthood, actually have been exposed to Epstein-Barr virus. Some people have no symptoms whatsoever, but some people can get really bad symptoms. And this is true, especially if people have mononucleosis. Think about how they feel when they have mononucleosis. They are extremely, extremely fatigued. So they typically are having these same symptoms as long COVID, as a reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus. So this is what's really interesting, is that this virus will never reemerge unless the immune system gets absolutely hammered. So can it be another infection or a co-infection like COV, et cetera, et cetera? Yes, absolutely. Could it also be stress? Absolutely. Can it also be lack of sleep? Absolutely. Can it be lack of vitamin D? Absolutely. Can it be type 2 diabetes? Absolutely. It's anything that's a stressor that lowers the body's immune system response. And yes, it can be a co-infection. So here's what he said. Some folks suffering with COV, et cetera, long haul symptoms might actually be experiencing an attack of fatigue-inducing Epstein-Barr virus, a new study argues. 2/3 of a group of 30 COVID long haul patients had high levels of Epstein-Barr antibodies, suggesting that EBV lying dormant in their bodies had been reactivated by their coronavirus infection. More than 95% of adults carry Epstein-Barr, which is a herpes virus, the researcher said in the background notes. The virus's most common cause of mononucleosis, a disease that also leaves its sufferers persistently exhausted. So are these people who are constantly fatigued after experiencing a COV, et cetera, infection, could it be that they actually just are having a reactivation of a virus that was already in their body? Could it be? Well, during just this research study, 2/3 of them, the answer was yes. And if people are suffering with chronic fatigue syndrome, many times what we will do is we will run an Epstein-Barr virus panel or a viral panel in order to see if this virus, the immune system has gotten down enough in order to cause a reactivation of this virus. And yes, you can test for this, okay? You can test for it. So here's the thing. Can you test for specific viral infections? Yes, you can. So when we run a viral panel on someone, and in fact, we had a gentleman who came in with the strangest types of symptoms, just weird things that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And sometimes when things just don't make a whole lot of sense, we said, okay, how badly did this person get run down? Let's go ahead and let's run a viral panel and let's run an immune panel and let's see how his immune system is actually handling it. So he was showing a reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus, and it was causing terrible pain. It was causing terrible fatigue. It was causing a lot of neurological symptoms that were going on. And he got to the point where he got really, really run down and this virus started to build back up. And when you do this and you look at the different types of IgG reactions, IgM reactions, you can tell, is this an acute exposure or is this a chronic reactivation? So when you are seeing Epstein-Barr VCA IgG, this is a reactivation. When you're seeing Epstein-Barr EBNA IgG, this is a reactivation. When you're seeing Epstein-Barr early IgG, Epstein-Barr VCA IgM, that is an initial infection type of reaction. So when you are seeing that these are flagging positive as reactive, it is a reactivation of a virus that was already there in your body, okay? Now, how do you reactivate a virus? It's anything that can cause your immune system to start to suffer. So again, it can be stress, it can be different types of inflammatory reactions that are taking place. And yes, I do believe that it actually can be maybe even the flu, or it can be COV, et cetera, infection. It's whatever is going to bring that immune system down. So they may have cleared out the initial infection, but they had a reactivation of Epstein-Barr, and that's one of the things that is driving the actual chronic fatigue. Now, here's what's really interesting, because if you guys look at HIV, for example, when we run an immune system panel, it really is an HIV panel, okay? And so, sometimes when people get it and we're working with people remotely, I know that I've sent people to their hospital in order to get that specific test. And the doctor will say to the patient, do you think you have AIDS? So do you think you have AIDS? Why would you want this test? Well, it has nothing to do with AIDS. What it has to do with is looking at every single type of immune response in the body to see how well it is working. So this actually is a graph of what happens with an HIV infection, but you really can just look at it and say, yeah, this is an Epstein-Barr infection as well. So what you see, if you see it in the blue are known as your CD4 lymphocytes. These are called your helper T cells. Very important as far as mounting an acquired immune system response or an adaptive immune system response. And in fact, if you just actually Google this, you go on WebMD and they will say, basically the health of a person's immune system can be summed up by the number of CD4 cells that they have. When those CD4 cells get low, you can kiss your immune system goodbye. And so CD4 cells are so important, these helper T cells, in coordinating immune system response with suppressor T cells, CD8 cells, natural killer cells. These are basically the general that is coordinating this adaptive immune system response. So what you'll see in the blue is you're seeing actually your CD4 response, and then what you're seeing is like an initial Epstein-Barr infection, and then subsequently what happens when it actually can get reactivated again. So when you look at this, initial infection, you have your CD4 cells really high, and then you have this proliferation of the virus. So you see, as you have this virus, you're going to see a corresponding decrease in your CD4 cells, and then it will then start to ramp back up, and it will keep this virus under wraps. But what happens is if this immune system response gets suppressed for whatever reason, so what might it be? It might be too much mental stress. It may be because you're eating too much doggone sugar, guys, and it doesn't take a brain scientist or a rocket scientist to know that sugar absolutely suppresses your immune system. It actually may be due to a vaccine. What's interesting, guys, is that if you, they actually will say, do not get the CD8, CD4 test immediately after flu vaccine, because it will skew the numbers and it will show that there's a decrease in CD4, CD8 cells post-vaccine. That's interesting. They even admit that taking a vaccine will actually decrease your immune system responses. So anything that's going to pile on, including other viral infections, but what's interesting is what can also decrease this CD4 response? Well, chemotherapy can do it because chemotherapy will kill the immune system. It's a toxin, and the immune system has a high rate of high metabolism, which means it's usually the first cells that actually are going to go first, including your immune system, and then also things like anything that's quickly growing, including the hair follicle and things like that. That's why people lose their hair. But also certain things like, how about Humira? So any kind of autoimmune immunosuppressant will also cause a corresponding decrease in CD4 cells. This is why one of the side effects of all of these different types of autoimmune medications, really the whole goal is to knock out the immune system, and this is why they say one of the side effects of long-term use is in fact cancer. That's why you need an immune system to be sky high your whole life in order to be able to kill off cells that are becoming cancerous. Excuse me. In fact, Guyton's medical textbook of physiology actually says this. It says is that the immune system is responsible for killing off cancer cells, and it will do it all the time as long as you have enough of these specific cells. So you are going to have something that will trigger, and as the CD4 cell starts to decrease, then what happens is you're going to have a corresponding reactivation of a virus. This is why if someone is HIV positive, why they're doing these tests 6 months every year in order to see what their T cell response is. And so all it takes is a stressor that is going to cause a decrease in immune system cells, and then what happens is that it cannot keep this viral infection under wraps and subclinical, and then it becomes clinical and it will start to replicate, and then you will start to have the symptoms specifically of fatigue. So how long does it take to be able to recover? Well, it can take a while, and your ability to be able to recover really is determined on how quickly you start working on it. So people who have been suffering with chronic fatigue for 3 or 4 or 5 years, it can take a long time to be able to recover from it. And we're not talking about weeks. We're talking about months into years even for some people. And so these are the people with chronic viral infections. You will see a poor immune system response. You'll see they'll think that they have adrenal fatigue. You will think that they're tired all the time. You would think you'll see that their hormone levels are going to be really low. And guys, this is why you have any kind of hormone issues that are going on, you have to think stress and you have to think immune. It's not you need just to take more progesterone cream. It's not, a lot of guys is a response to something that's immune or something that is a response to some kind of chronic stressor as well. So ultimately though, you can be Epstein-Barr virus positive and you can see that, but really it just begs the question, well then why on earth, how on earth did this happen? And this is why you always have to go back even to a deeper level and you have to see, all right, well, let's go ahead and let's look at this person's immune system. Let's look at this person's immune system. So many times people will say, yeah, I got all of this extensive testing, and yet when you look at their immune system, they're really only looking at just the basic surface numbers. So they're really just looking at things like monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, lymphocytes, but they're not looking at specifically the specific lymphocyte subset from those that are measuring things like your specific B lymphocytes, your specific T cells like your CD4, your CD8, your natural killer cells, all of those different things. So the ones that I have highlighted in through here, look at what you can actually look at if you're properly testing the immune system. So you got your CD19 lymphocytes, you got your CD4 cells, your CD8 cells, your absolute natural killer cells, and the percentage of natural killer cells. And so you can see all of those different things. So CD4, the helper T cells, CD8, these are the ones that are killing virally infected cells. These are also the ones that are killing cancer cells. And then you also have your CD19 cells, which are basically looking at your B lymphocytes, the one that are secreting antibodies specifically to actually take a virus and what's known as opsonize or opsonization, which means basically just coating the virus so make it too big to be able to enter into the cell. So this is why, guys, like antibody production is not the end-all be-all, because you still need specific CD8 cells and natural killer cells and things like that to actually go and then still kill off the virus after it has been basically attached by antibodies. So here's another interesting thing too. You do the immune panel and you can actually measure what's known as CEA. So carcinogenic embryonic antigen. So you look at this is also a measurement of very quickly growing tissue. Name a tissue that quickly grows inside the body, that's called cancer. And when you start seeing those things start to creep up, that will actually determine, hey, something is not right inside the body and something is quickly growing faster than other tissue. And that's why it's a good indicator early on of saying like, hey, could be some kind of cancer that's taking place inside the body. So who are the people that are long haulers? Well, these are going to be the people who are going to have a very low initially CD4 response, a CD8 response, and they have a hard time even clearing out an initial infection of COV, et cetera, which is why it can take for some people 3 to 4 weeks because they just don't have enough immune cells to quickly start to clear out the virus. But then it leaves them open to have some kind of Epstein-Barr reactivation, which then just absolutely destroys them and leaves them with such terrible chronic fatigue. And it can take a very long time to be able to recover. So I thought, guys, that was interesting, is that just looking at things from a different perspective, because guys, much of what we're dealing with has to be with stress and it has to do with the immune system. Now, what ultimately will cause you to have a low CD4 response or CD8 response or natural killer cells? Really what it comes down to is coming down to the basics that you're too stressed, that you have too much mental stress, that there's too much chemical inflammation that is going on, or you have way too many physical stressors. Now, that person who had an Epstein-Barr reactivation, really weird neurological symptoms, also had a lot of damage and degeneration of the disc, of the spinal cord, and the nerve system. And it didn't take much for those symptoms just to absolutely just go crazy and start to spike up. So my question is Guys, how are you handling the mental aspect of stress? How are you handling the chemical aspect of stress? Have you gotten your food allergies tested? Have you gotten, a proper, inflammatory panel? Have you gotten your hormones tested? Have you gotten your stool tested? Have you gotten an x-ray? Have you gotten a flexion extension x-ray to see what's good and what's not so good, what's working and what's not working? Chances are, guys, if you're listening to this, you haven't gotten any of that, but I guarantee you I'm going to have someone who say, I'm interested in getting Epstein-Barr virus testing. Guys, rather than start to chase after, the exotic, you have to start working on the foundational stuff. So are you guys working on mental stress, on chemical stress, on physical stress? Because you start working on that, the body can recover so much better. And in fact, I will tell you this, here's a bold statement, this is an opinion, there really is nothing that the body cannot recover from, okay, that it cannot recover from. Now, are there times where people need fire department care? Absolutely, absolutely. Someone's having a heart attack, please don't send them to me. I will send them to the hospital. They do a wonderful job with fire department type care. Someone has a gunshot wound. Please don't send them to me. Please send them to the emergency room because they do awesome job with trauma care. If someone completely dislocates the shoulder, you probably need to send them to fire department care and they need to go to the orthopedic. They need to go to the emergency room. They have a broken bone. I do not set broken bones. But the problem is, guys, is that no one, after they have fire department care, what are they doing? Have they hired a carpenter in order to rebuild their body? Have they hired a carpenter to rebuild their house? And the problem is that so many times we have fire department care, we do nothing afterwards, and we continue to live in a house that continues to rot more and more and more. And then we wonder at 45, 50, 60, 65, 70 years of age, what on earth happened? I guess I'm just getting old. You're not old. It's just that you have been injured so many times and you've done nothing to rebuild and repair yourself properly. So what are you guys doing? For mental stress, for chemical inflammation, for physical stress, physical inflammation. And are you handling those three? And if you handle those three things really well, then you don't have to worry about being a long hauler. You don't have to worry about having an Epstein-Barr reactivation because the body will handle those things on its own. So guys, this is actually